Our Let's Talk virtual series. We're very excited to have you in attendance. And today we have presenting Grand Traverse County Assistant Prosecutor Charlie Hamlyn. So a few housekeeping matters before we get started. Just want to let everybody know that we are recording today's session so that we can share it later on our YouTube page. So just a heads up for everyone there. Everyone is muted and will stay muted for the duration of the program. You'll also notice that your videos are turned off as well. And if you have any questions, which we encourage you to ask questions, please feel free to send them in the chat box, and then we will pass those on to Charlie at the end. And as I said before, if you can all take a minute to enter your first and last name in the chat box so we can track attendance, it would be greatly appreciated. So now on to Charlie's intro. And I have to admit, I'm nervous not to screw this up because in full disclosure, he is my fiance. So let's see if I can get through this. So Charlie received his Juris Doctorate degree from Michigan State University College of Law, and then he also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Michigan in Economics and Political Science. So prior to law school, he was in the United States Marine Corps for over 5 years and attained the rank of captain and was deployed to Iraq twice. So during law school, he completed internships in multiple county prosecutors' offices and was an associate editor on the Law Review. Immediately following graduation, he worked for a small firm in Mount Pleasant as a general practitioner and served as the assistant city prosecutor for the city of Mount Pleasant. In 2012, he accepted an appointment as the assistant prosecuting attorney in Jackson County, where he worked until he joined the Grand Traverse County Prosecuting Attorney's Office in late 2013. Charlie was born and raised in Traverse City and graduated from Traverse City Central High School. He's currently on the board of directors for the TBA Credit Union, as well as Veterans in Crisis. He's a member of the Traverse City Rotary Club and is a member of the United Methodist Church. He resides in Grand Traverse County with me and our two rescue dogs. So Charlie, take it away.
All right. So before Charlie gets started, I'm going to launch the first poll. So if you guys do not mind answering that for us, we would like to know who you are. So choose the best answer that describes you. All right, so it looks like we have quite a few community members, so thank you guys for joining us, and a few child welfare professionals, caregivers, school staff, healthcare professionals, so pretty diverse group. Thank you guys very much. And then we've got our last poll. We would like to know, have you or anyone you know ever been a scam victim? All right, pretty split group. Cool. So hopefully with you guys attending, you guys will learn a little bit from Charlie. And at this point, I am going to let you take it away, Charlie.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. You all wanted to end your day with a presentation on scams at 4 o'clock. Very brave, but try to keep you awake and see if I can do it. So everybody should be seeing the presentation now. Okay. And so to be fair, this started out as a presentation that we did for folks dealing with the elderly, because a lot of times they were the victims of scams. And then we expanded it because we realized that it applies to everybody, no matter who you are, what age you are. So I think it's good for community members. It's good for all the folks who just entered the poll and said that they were there. On the right is Noah Muggenberg. She's the prosecuting attorney for Grand Traverse County. And on the left is Sheriff Bensley. Use Sheriff Bensley because the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office is the one who ends up investigating a lot of our cases. So this is the theme of the presentation. It's something my dad told me a long time ago, and we've all heard it before. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So that's really the theme. It's really the presentation is not designed to scare you in any way, although some of the parts might, just how accessible your information is. But really, it's designed to help you identify those red flags for when there might be trouble, whether it's you, whether it's a family member. We want to make sure that we identify the problem before it becomes one, because as we've seen, when we get the case at our office, quite honestly, it's usually just too late because the money is gone and it's untraceable at that point. So unfortunately, we can't help folks, which is one of the most frustrating things that we run into. So why do people do it? You may ask, why would you go out and send all of the emails and all the Nigerian scams that we all love so much? And that's because between 20 and $40 billion per year are lost in the United States due to scams and due to fraud. So obviously, it's a pretty big payday for the people doing it. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, the internet has really made it a lot easier for folks to do this. So the presentation is basically broken down into 4 parts. First, we'll talk about some of the common financial scams that we see, add in a couple of ways that you can protect yourself, some of the common schemes and scams that we see in Grand Traverse County specifically. We'll go through the legal process really quickly just to explain it. Hopefully nobody that's on will ever need to know that. And then of course, do questions and answers at the end. So some of the quote unquote newer tricks that we're seeing out there, people are using their smartphones. So, let's say you had your wallet open or your checkbook open and you're paying at Meijer or something like that. And I guess I should preface this that it's before COVID with all the social distancing. That's actually helped, I guess, in a weird way for scams. People can't as easily access your information. But what they might do is if you were at the counter writing out a check, they act like they're on their phone surfing the internet, but what they're doing is taking pictures of your check that you're filling out so that way they have your information. Also, there were companies called Moneygram. Basically, they were preloaded money cards. And then Western Union, nothing against those companies, but it's just a lot of the ways that people were using it. They would tell the victims, just send it by Western Union because that way they don't have to trace it. Now we're starting to see gift cards and iTunes cards being used as the medium of money that they want. And again, that's just because it's untraceable and they can quite easily resell it. Also with Craigslist or other person-to-person sales sites, I remember there was one time, I think it was when I was moving out of East Lansing, I put some furniture on there and I must have gotten 150 emails and I think 3 to 5 of them were legitimate and the rest were just spam. So it's really easy for people just to attack websites like that. Also, dating websites are some of the new things that we're seeing. Obviously, especially with COVID, people are lonely. So it's a pretty good way to get into people's lives. And then what they call smishing. I'm not really sure why they picked that name, but that is when you get the text messages basically to your cell phone and it seems to, your bank has a question for you, please fill out this form. And it includes a link, which then gives them access to your phone, possibly, or some other information. But we still see the same old scams work. That's why they do them. Healthcare and Medicare, obviously the Medicare portion of it doesn't apply to the target demographic of the Children's Advocacy Center. That's more for folks out in the community who may be of age to be in that program. But the same themes still apply. We've even seen it more recently with COVID. They have already told people not to post pictures of their vaccination card after the first shot, for example, because people can use that as a scam to go get a second shot for themselves. But a lot of times with healthcare fraud, they will get your information and then it doesn't have anything to do with you necessarily after that. They just use it to bill healthcare agencies for services that they don't provide. So they just basically use your information to fill out forms claiming to use for both medicine services and it may be things like wheelchairs that they order that obviously people wouldn't need. So and for folks that get phone calls, it may come along the lines of, you need to renew now. We don't want you to lose benefits. It's always, as you'll see from anything dealing with the telephone, basically the theme of that is it's always a threat at the end that you're going to lose services somehow, and we wouldn't want that to happen, things along those lines. They'll always want to make it seem as though they're helping you out. So, and email is a pretty common way to do this as well as telephone. Government agencies generally are not going to contact you by telephone. We always tell them that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later with the IRS scams that we see. But never sign blank insurance documentation or blanket authorizations for services. Basically what that does is it just gives them carte blanche to pretend to be you, and they use your signature and information just to get services that you'll never even see. So, and obviously only give medical information to reputable people. Now, again, I'm not trying to scare people with this. If you get a call and it's from your doctor's office and you've gone there for 20 years, it's perfectly okay to give them information about you and your family. But if you get a call from a number that you don't recognize, just tell them that you would feel more comfortable calling the office back directly. I've done that a couple of times myself, and no one has ever seemed offended or anything like that. So, and if somebody does want to provide any services for you, make sure they give you an itemized list as opposed to just a blanket document that you can go through. Counterfeit prescription drugs. This one does touch all ages. Most commonly, we see this as an internet or email scam at this point. Basically, it's a promise of lower prices. And then the danger is that you either get fake pills or can be more dangerous as incorrect or different pills. So the money is long gone, obviously, but one of the main concerns is that if you're ingesting substances, let's say you're taking other medications and your doctor obviously has gone through the interactions that may occur. If you're taking different substances that might mix, it could result in some harm that comes to you. So just be very careful there. Obviously, pay attention to the appearance of the pills themselves. Normally, big pharmacy pills that you would get from your doctor, they all have the same look, shape. Usually there's a number or an emblem imprinted on it. And obviously, if you're going to change that up, consult with your physician or a pharmacist about anything that you do feel is suspicious. Be careful when you're going on the internet. There are ways to protect yourself. So either VIPS or the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, they do sort of have a registration of sorts for reputable online pharmacies. So if you just Google the NABP, they can go through and let you know if it's a good one or not. This is the site where you can put in the name of the pharmacy. So telemarketing scams, these are the most common and the ones that folks will be most familiar with. The internet has been a wonderful thing over the last year, obviously, with things like this and Zoom, allow everyone to get together. But it has also, unfortunately, made it much, much more easy for people to get away with these crimes. There's something called Voip, it's voice over internet protocol. And it's most phone systems nowadays. And what that allows people to do is much more easily cover their tracks on the phone numbers. If you remember when, caller ID first came out and you would get a call from a scammer, it would either be all nines or all zeros or something that was identifiable. Now when you get a phone call, it will usually have a local area code because that's what they do. They figure out where you are based on your zip code, and then they put in an area code. I got one time where the number was almost my phone number. It was 1 or 2 digits off. So it's a way to make it seem more familiar so that you answer the phone. And of course, it was a computer voice on my voicemail telling me that there was a warrant for my arrest. And if I didn't call back within 30 minutes and give them money, which as a prosecutor, I can tell you is not the way that the justice system works. So don't worry about that. Some of the more common ones that we see is the Irs scam, especially this time of year with tax season being in full bore, but also with that, really, I guess we could call it the government scam because, I even got one yesterday. I had a voicemail telling me that they would be more than happy to double my stimulus payment if I would just contact them and give them my information, and they would give it to me on a special card that they would send to me. So beyond even just the Internal Revenue Service, this would apply to all of those kind of scenarios. So again, they're going to call and pretend to be an agent with the IRS. They're going to make threats. They're going to tell you that you're going to go to jail, but if you pay a certain portion now, they'll forgive everything, which again goes back to that theme of how they frame sort of the way that they talk to you. Of course, they're going to want your personal information, your bank account information, all that kind of stuff. The Pigeon Drop, this is one that I don't know that we see all the time. Basically, they say that they have a large sum of either money or, if I can just get this oil out of the ground or gold or whatever it would be, and they want a good faith payment or deposit. So, if you send us a check for $5,000, then we'll send you something back for $50,000 or something extravagant like that. Sometimes they'll choose to use a third party. That's why I have that on there. Somebody will pose as a banker or a lawyer, perhaps, just to try to reinforce that it's a good deal and that you should take advantage of it. Grandparent Scam. This one, though, it seems over the last couple of years has really moved on to just going beyond grandparents. The way that they used to do this is they would literally just take a phone book and call numbers. And then if somebody sounded elderly to them, they would try it. Now with technology and again, social media, they have such good ways of being able to at least research people a little bit that they can go on and target people who are younger and have younger children to try to make that person, the younger child, the victim as well. So it really is starting to, I guess, just be the any person scam. So they'll call and pretend to be the grandchild. Do you know who this is? The police, I was at a friend's apartment and it got raided by the police when I was in California. That was one that we had, and the person had been in California and they were posting on Facebook which is how they got that information. So, but when they're trying to do it on a grandparent, they'll just say, do you remember when you said you were going to give me money for textbooks, things like that. And again, they commonly use the Western Union or the gift cards nowadays. So the fake accident is somewhat similar. They just pretend to be a relative or a child and say that they need money. And again, this could be hospital or jail. It's some just emergency that the person needs money now, which is why they go through it. And unfortunately, we do see charity scams. So make sure people do research, especially times, they obviously target, right now with COVID, whether it's veterans organizations, when 9/11 happened, the hurricanes or other natural disasters. Everybody wants to do the right thing and give money to help people. That's very admirable. I'm not trying to change that by any means. Just make sure it's a reputable organization and do the research. You just want to make sure that you're not sending it to somebody who doesn't deserve it. So, and again, in general, for telemarketing scams, the federal government normally is not going to contact you by telephone. You'll just get snail mail like everything else. Beware of the warning phrases. And again, that usually means that it has a time limit on it, right? You need to act now. Otherwise, this won't be good. It's a high profit, no risk offer. Those are my favorites as well. Also, be careful of the company identifying itself as well. I'll talk about email scams in a minute, but what people were doing there was an airline ticket one that we had a couple of years ago where it was with American Airlines, and the email address that they pretended to link to looked like an American Airlines web address, but when you actually clicked that link, which triggered the email, the address in the to line was completely different, and that's when it became a scam. So they can create links like that as well. So be careful about those things. If it's a charity, hopefully they would have some written material that they would be able to give to you, or certainly if it's a prize offer, and never pay for a free prize. We see that far too often where, somebody had they meet on a dating website, or it's somebody down the road and, they have a family member who is waiting for an inheritance in England or Turkey or some of the ones that we've seen, but they just have to pay the inheritance tax, I think is what it's usually called in the scam. And then they can do that. So, and never give out personal information over the telephone. And again, if it's with a reputable person like your doctor's office and they're just calling to confirm something, maybe it's somebody new and you don't recognize the voice or the name. You can just tell them you're going to call back and then call the number that you know is good. It usually only takes a couple of extra minutes. There also is the Do Not Call Registry. Obviously, thieves, theoretically, this would work and you could put your number on this registry and never get another call again. But I did that years ago and I still get them every now and then. So it's not a perfect solution, but it is something that can at least help. So the internet fraud and scams, I try to break these down into a couple of categories, but these are the ones that we're going to see more and more often as technology just expands. Think about what you do with your cell phone and now how everything having to do with your life is on it. So that is, of course, going to be the way that they do it. Pop-up windows, the false advertisements. A lot of times this will be for antivirus software or, can we do a scan to make your computer more efficient? Those kinds of things. What happens really is that the victim downloads a program that can either damage the computer, it steals data. One of the more recent things that we've seen targeting companies and hospitals and everything else has been, where they click on a link in an email and then it locks out the system. And then if they don't pay a ransom demand, essentially they call it ransomware. If they don't pay a certain amount of money by a certain time, then the system is locked forever and they can never get into it, which is pretty scary if you think about, if you're a financial institution, if it's a hospital, school system, any kind of business. If it were county government, that would be terrifying. So just things like that. So obviously never click on or download anything for a company you don't recognize. I know that IT departments, especially like ours at the county, they work really hard to filter out those emails so that they don't even make it to people, which is really helpful. And then be careful when you download anything at all. And I'm all for finding deals on the internet, but be very careful. And if you can, stick to reputable companies, just because usually that'll work out a little bit better. So the email, obviously, it's the same thing, the same idea, I should say. You would get an email from a bank. The one that we've seen most recently was from Chase, and we were sent a copy of the email, actually, that has recently gone around. It looks perfect, almost, other than a little bit of the verbiage, but it has the emblems on it. It has the web addresses correctly listed. So it is a very high quality thing. The only reason that it got sent to us or brought to our attention was one of the people who received it, they don't have a Chase account at all. So they thought that was suspicious and they sent it to us. So they're getting very, very good at this. So just be very careful about getting an email through what I call common email, right? If you get something from Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, saying please reply with all of your personal information, that's not the way that banks or financial institutions are going to work. So again, they're not going to send you unsecured emails. Now, this doesn't apply, for example, I'm a member of a credit union. When I log in, they have messaging services once you get behind the password protection where you can interact with their staff. That's perfectly fine. That's not what I'm talking about. But I have a Hotmail account that I've had forever, for example, and I use that for online shopping because that's where all my spam emails go. And so that's what it would be, right? The person would send an email to an account like that and just say, please reply with, we're updating our records. Please reply with your updated contact information, and we need your account number too, which I always found odd of why the bank itself would need that information. But and not to pick on banks, it will come from everywhere too. So just don't ever give out confidential information in an unsecured email. So this is an example that I always use. When I was in the Jackson County office, we started getting calls one day asking us if Jerry Jarzinka was the elected prosecutor there, and it still is, excuse me. And we got calls, each of us randomly, just asking if he was okay. And, everybody kind of got one or two and didn't think anything of it until, you go get a cup of coffee and you hear other people talking about it. So his wife worked at Lumen Christi, which is kind of, it's their big Catholic school system, a lot like St. Francis would be up here. And so this is an email that folks in her email system, email chain, got. And if you just take a couple of minutes to read it. So basically what it says is that they're overseas on a trip and that they were the victims of armed robbery and you need to send money. Now, what people are playing on is a desire for help, because every single person that called us, they weren't asking, oh, is Jerry okay? We know he's okay. And to say that we got scammed when we got this email. They were calling to say, how can we help? Where should we send the money? Do we send it to them? Do we give it to you guys? Because everybody wants to help, right? And that's admirable. But other than a couple grammatical errors, this is a pretty believable thing. And if you'll notice where it says mail to and then has her email address, that's like when I mentioned before. So if you clicked on that so that it would automatically populate a reply email, that's when it would be a different one, because when it popped up, because we did it on one just to see what would happen, it actually brought up a different email address entirely. So to ask them where to send the funds, and obviously I think they realized the gig was up. But it's just an example of how coordinated this is, and this is from years ago, so they're only going to get better. So in terms of other common methods of contact, email is big, Craigslist, as I mentioned, social media and online dating sites are only getting bigger, and that applies to all ages. Whether it's scams for money or predatory behavior, we are just seeing that stuff like crazy with online stuff. In terms of password protection, so I go through this obviously and I update it for every year. What I can tell you is I started doing this presentation, 2012 or so. And when I update it, it's not so much like I have to delete the list and then completely redo it. Usually it's just reshuffling. So this is the top 10, but really if I put up the top 25, it's been virtually the same every year. So number one, if you have a password like this, please change it immediately. And then more importantly, keep it simple, but not too simple. A good suggestion is what I call the sentence method. So, Michigan State is a much better basketball team than Michigan, for example. So what you can do is take a sentence like that and then take the first letter of each word and then maybe replace an I with an exclamation mark or an A with the @ sign. Because what you don't want is just something easy to figure out, right? When Apple got hacked and all the celebrities did, what they do is just put a dictionary app basically against the password. So if you have a common word like Apple, it's going to feed that because that's a common word. Whereas if you make a random combination of letters and symbols, that's a lot more difficult to figure out. So also what I do is, for like my financial institution websites, for example, I have a much more complex password that I use. And then when I'm, doing shopping stuff where I'm not so much worried about security. I mean, if somebody wants to break into Chewy.com and send me a little extra dog food, I guess I'm not so worried about that. So I have a different password for that kind of thing. I always tell people, do not write passwords down. Please do not have a note, for example, on your cell phone that's entitled passwords. You'd be surprised how many people do that. Now, if you have a safe at home or something like that, where you keep all your precious documents and you want to write them down so that they're in there, perfectly fine. Also keep monitoring your sites. And now, whether it's financial institutions or shopping sites, or even I noticed on my iPhone, I went to log into a website that I hadn't been on in a while, and it told me that your password may be compromised. You should consider changing it. So there's a lot of protections in place, and companies are being really careful on this kind of thing going forward. So also, if you're using a public computer, be very, very careful, just because the cache on the computer can keep that information in there. So usually there's a box on a website where it'll say, click here if you're logged on to a public computer, because that way it'll delete that information. Facebook and social media. So I've sort of categorized these under Facebook, but it really applies to all of them. Please do not help thieves and post vacation pictures. I realize, everyone that goes to Florida, pre-COVID, I suppose, to make us all jealous. For those of us who stay here when it's snowing outside, it's perfectly fine to put those up and make us jealous. Please just wait until you get home, because obviously if you're posting pictures in Florida, I know that you're not at home. And a lot of people will do, oh, only 1 week to go. And again, I understand the sentiment, but if the wrong people see it, it's just very difficult. And, with Facebook and social media, they've improved privacy tremendously. And you may think that, well, all of my information is safe, it's private. Well, all it takes is a friend of a friend or something along those lines. The other thing I wanted to cover are those surveys that I see people do where, it's like, okay, well, I'll just do this too. And then it asks you like 25 questions. So I'm not going to say that all of those are scams or designed to be that way, but a lot of them are. And really what it is, it's not to get your personal information. It's to figure out the information for a lot of the typical security questions. So you'll notice that, what was the first street that you lived on? What was the first car that you had? What's your middle name? Or, something along those lines. Those are the common questions that you'll see on those. And that's really what it's designed for, is to try to figure out, okay, what are those typical security questions for resetting the password? Because if I can't figure that out, and if I can reset it and scam and try to get their information that way. So be very careful. And now for the folks, I did this, and I don't mean to scare you with this. It'll go through a series of websites and basically how I found somebody who I would think that would have money. And then I got to their house. And in this video, I think is about 1 minute and 42 seconds long. But obviously I had done it as a run through. So it might take me a little longer than that if I was a thief, but I don't think much. So hopefully it should go. And so what I did is I tried to figure out, who donates money that has money. And so I figured, the Symphony Orchestra. And again, nothing against the TSO. They're very good. I didn't mean to say you shouldn't donate to them by doing this. But what most organizations do, of course, is they identify their donors because they want to recognize them on their website. And I didn't go quite to the top, but I went in the third category down. And I picked Biederman just because I recognize the name on a lot of buildings, and I know there's a family foundation that helps out a lot of folks in our community. Then the other important thing to remember is that records in terms of property are publicly available. So you can just go to the county website. And if you go to Google Maps, it has a great feature called Street View, which allows you to actually see the exact point where you are. So if I'm a thief, that house, given the location and what it looks like, is certainly somebody that I may want to target. So, and again, I don't show that to scare anybody, but it just shows that even if you're not on social media and you think you're being careful, we always have to be vigilant, because it's really easy for people to run down our information. So the Nigerian scam, this one sadly is still used because it still works. So it's usually a prince or other member of a deposed royal family They have a large supply of money, gold, some valuable resource, and they can't access it without your help. So normally we've seen this one over email as of late, but snail mail was happening before, telephone and some variation of this. But the idea is, again, sort of like the Pigeon Drop, where you send us a little bit to us and we'll send you a large amount back. Again, remember the theme, and no offense to anybody out there, but I don't think royalty is going to contact anybody randomly in Grand Traverse County or Northern Michigan to get help. Plus, if their accounts really are frozen by our government or the international community, there's probably a very good reason, so you don't want to get involved with that. And so homeowner scams, these are common as well. A couple of the ones that we've seen that are pretty good, the county assessor, what they did is they took the emblem for the county assessor and put it on a letterhead, and then they sent it out to a bunch of homes. And what they did is they said they'll offer a reassessment of the property value. And of course, they try to target it as well. Like, so for example, homes in Traverse City right now, in Leelanau County, everywhere around here are skyrocketing because of everybody wanting to move out of cities and all that kind of stuff. So they would send a letter saying, we'll do a reassessment. Do you want to set that up? They bring them into your house, that kind of thing. Reverse mortgages, these aren't all scams. There are quote unquote legitimate ones out there, and they can have a value. Just make sure you research it before you do that, because it's just a way that you'll think you're getting more than you do. So be careful with those. Again, for all those, sorry, wrong way. There we go. So if you do get a letter from a county assessor or any kind of government agency, just call. If it's the county especially, it's pretty easy to find our phone numbers. Reverse mortgages, again, just make sure you research the company to see that it's a valid one. Sweepstakes and lottery scams. This one, again, you should never have to pay for a prize. That's really the end of the day. But a lot of times the winning check will be fake. Your bank will hold it for a couple of days, but you think because you've had that, you're good. So then you send the money. And then you'll unfortunately find out from your financial institution that it didn't clear. So, but unfortunately your money's long gone and usually you can't get that back. So again, be careful of the warning phrases. And as you can see for these, there's a common, not only theme to the presentation, of course, but there's a theme through all of them of the way that they try to manipulate you to get that information. And the words may change, or the little variables may change, but it's all the same kind of thing that they're trying to get you to do. Travel scams. This occurred back in 2013. There was a newspaper advertisement for trips to Florida and the Kentucky Derby. Basically what happened is people paid deposits for the trips, and then they were told that they would get more information. None of that materialized. Thankfully, those people were actually here in the state of Michigan. So the Attorney General's office was able to prosecute those folks and get some of the money back. And I should mention for the other scams, that's really the biggest problem that we as law enforcement run into. Even if we can figure out exactly what happened, that's the difficult part with these is you have a victim, you know exactly what happened and can prove it, but you can never find the person because they're somewhere in the world, and nobody, including the FBI, usually has the resources or ability to track that down. And usually to get federal partners involved, the amount of money has to just be astronomical. So it's very difficult for us to do that. Other financial scams, and then again, these this is the slide that I would have in the presentation if I was talking about elderly folks generally, but in a way I left it in on purpose because generally these themes still do apply. So powers of attorney, there are general ones, there are limited ones for very specific things. So for example, when I deployed to Iraq, I left my truck here and there was a coworker that was a civilian that was going to still be on base. So I gave her a limited power of attorney for my truck. So if anything happened, she could do something with that. The thing that we ran into when I was in the military, some guy had a girlfriend and he wanted to give her a general power of attorney, which allowed her to, or him to really have anything that they wanted because it is the same legal power that you have. So they can be very, very dangerous. And so the reason I left it in this slide is because, if children are involved and a parent's going on a trip, let's say, they may do one of these documents for medical reasons or other things just in their absence. So just be very careful in how you do that. Caregivers too, be careful of who you're letting in your home, whether it's a babysitter or anything else, because there are companies that do this and there are folks that do this who are great and they do background checks and there aren't any issues. But we do have those cases where unfortunately people who are invited into the home do take advantage of that. And also don't think just because it's family members, it won't happen. The common thing that we hear with those is, well, they would want me to have it or it's going to be mine anyway. So even when children are involved, just be very careful about who gets to come into the home. And again, powers of attorney. I said go see a lawyer. Please don't take that as an advertisement for fellow attorneys. As I see Katie's smiling, I'm not a big fan of lawyers. I think the world would probably be a little bit better off if there were fewer of us. But you know, such as it is. But the reason I put that is because I've seen some of the ones, you know, if you Google power of attorney, and it's laughable. So if you need a quality one for a good reason, just go ahead and do it that way. And again, caregivers, there are very, very good folks who do very good work, especially in our area, whether it's elderly folks or with children. Just make sure it's somebody you trust, you know, get recommendations from friends. Don't just Google somebody and pick them out of that way. And if it's a company, make sure they do background checks on their employees and all those kinds of things. And again, with family members, be very, very careful. So some of the common cases that we've seen in Grand Traverse County will be some of those examples. Home healthcare workers, again, it's just people who have access. And, you know, it's for folks, you know, for example, if you have stacks of bills in a drawer, those common areas, just make sure you check those after the person's gone, credit cards, family heirlooms, those kinds of things. Hide and secure them if you can. Also check and make sure those hiding spots, and just, you know, be careful again of who you're inviting into your home. Helping hand, this was one where an elderly victim was approached by somebody at church, actually. You know, heard her complaining about how hot it was that summer and about installing a heating and cooling system, took money from her, and obviously that never materialized. And again, if it's somebody involved in this kind of work, or other things, you know, could be involving children, or it could be other things, not just heating and cooling. If you go to the licensing and regulatory affairs for the state of Michigan, they are the ones who maintain a lot of the licenses for things like that. And you can go to their website and you can run a name. So if you go to, you know, the Michigan Bar Association, for example, you can run my last name to make sure that I'm a licensed attorney. So there are ways to do backgrounds for those kinds of things. This one was a son, and in this case, it was an elderly victim, but we've had other ones where it's just a child taking the parent's money. You know, they either access actually through like an Apple account. So if they share an Apple account as a family and the parent has a credit card linked to that, the kid can go out and actually make purchases with that and withdraw money in ways that are actually pretty ingenious, but also very scary because, you know, folks, even my age bracket, don't know how to do that kind of thing. And unfortunately for this one, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that were involved, and it really impacted the care that she could receive at the end of her life. So it really does make it difficult after that. Prize money is another one that we see where folks of all ages, really, whether it's a lottery scam. And I think that's, you know, especially unfortunately in times of COVID, right? You know, so many people have unfortunately lost their jobs and are down on their luck and can't find a way out of it, right? It doesn't seem like there's hope out there. And then, you know, somebody comes along and offers you this glimmer, and you may know deep down that it's just a glimmer of hope, but you want to go after it anyway. So these are the kinds of things that people are going to use this time during this time frame. And again, never pay for a prize. That's the overall one there. And contractors, this one has increased a lot recently over the last couple of years, especially in our area, where, you know, people, they'll come through and say, yeah, I'll build your deck. You know, I'm going to need half of it as a down payment for materials and stuff like that. And again, you know, it's a difficult on these, whether it's a criminal matter or a civil matter. We usually have law enforcement do an investigation so that we can try to figure it out. But if nothing else, at least, you know, we can have it examined. And then if it's a small claim matter, the nice part there is no lawyers are involved. So it's one way around that as well. And again, use reputable people, get recommendations from friends. You can verify licensing through Lara and all those kinds of things. And there's a case that happened in Jackson that I thought was pretty ingenious. So I always bring it up, and it doesn't matter what age bracket I present to, I use this one. So it was a roaming band of gypsies, actually. And what they did is they went posing as the water department, and, you know, they had the hard hats, they had the vests and everything. And what they would do is go to a person's home, and they would say, oh, they're just checking, you know, water pressure, for example. So usually the homeowner would go into the kitchen with the person. They would say, oh, do you have other sinks, like other bathrooms? You know, Fred here is just going to go check those so we can make sure that you have water pressure on all of them at the same time. Well, obviously that would give them access to the home, and then they would take things. Thankfully for us in Jackson, we were able to catch them. I think they were still in the Grand Rapids area, so we were able to get them there. So the legal process, and again, hopefully no one ever needs to worry about this, but normally either 911 is contacted, or in Grand Traverse County, 922-4550 is the non-emergency line. But either way, law enforcement is contacted, and then depending on where the person lives, that'll usually determine which agency, whether it's the sheriff's department or the city police department, or even Michigan State Police in some cases. They'll go out and do an investigation, and then they'll forward a report to us. And a lot of times with these, they're complicated, so it may take a while to do that investigation. We'll tell them to go get bank records and do search warrants and do other things. So unfortunately, it's usually not a quick process, but we will review it for charges. And then if we do charge the person, a document, it's called a complaint. That's what we file with the court. And then that's what starts that process. The nice part is our office, and really all prosecutors' offices, have really put a lot of attention on the victims in cases like this, and the cases that unfortunately the CAC has to deal with as well. So you'll never be lost in the process. There will always be somebody to guide you through that. And then again, there's a series of hearings and legal activities that we'll do our best to explain. It is not like television. We do not finish it in 40 minutes with commercial breaks. So it does take us a little longer than that, but we will do the best that we can to make sure that the right thing is done. So resources for folks, that is my contact information. If anybody ever needs to get a hold of me for cases like this, hopefully not. I always tell people that it's very nice to meet them, but I hope I never see them in my professional capacity. Also, the Michigan Attorney General has a lot of resources on their webpage, and so does the FBI for scams. And it's a good thing, our county, through the no scam zone that I'll get to in a minute, which is it's put on through the Commission on Aging, and was designed, I think, originally for elder scams, but again, kind of like this presentation has spread out to people of all ages. So has the no scam zone. I mean, I signed up for it as part of this, obviously, but still, it's nice to get the emails and the information regardless of age. And so the way I kind of view it is I always check the FBI every now and then in the Attorney General's office, just to kind of get a feel for, nationally at the FBI's level, what scams are coming, so to speak. And then Attorney General's office, same thing. What are other people seeing across the state? Because it's only a matter of time before residents of our counties in this area see it, unfortunately. So that is the web address for the no scam zone. And again, it's through the Commission on Aging, but I would tell folks of all ages really to focus on it, because it doesn't matter who you are. I guarantee you that at some point in your life, I was actually surprised to see such a split on that poll question, because usually folks know somebody other than themselves. And again, the after hours central dispatch, that's the non-emergency line to 911. So, the other part that I would mention for folks, if you have family or friends who are unfortunately the victims of crimes like this, we hear from a lot of people that they waited to contact law enforcement or to report things, or they feel bad, they feel embarrassed, they feel stupid. It's not a matter of intelligence. Usually what I tell people is, if you're a victim of it, it ironically means you're a good person, most likely, and you were trying to help somebody or trying to do the right thing, and it's just somebody took advantage of that. So no one has ever looked down upon or anything like that. It's difficult. I get calls, and like I said, those voicemails, and I know better, but part of me still wants to call back, right, if it's a thing to help somebody, because you want to do that. And if you need to report something, whether it's for adult protective services or children's protective services, this is the centralized intake number for the Department of Health and Human Services. So please feel free to contact that. And with that is question and answers. So I think I stop sharing my screen, and it goes back to Jordan.
Yes. All right. So I have a question from somebody in the chat asking about the ic3.gov FBI controlled website program, if you know anything about that.
I don't. What is it called?
ic3.com or .gov. We have our very own Garrett Crone is asking.
I don't.
It is an FBI controlled website to report money scams. So for those of you on, that is also an outlet.
Perfect.
To utilize.
Could you give the web address one more time just so that everybody can get it?
ic3.gov. And I will put that in the chat right now.
Perfect.
I have a question. Charlie, you had made reference about getting, basically the money's gone at that point. Do people ever get it back? How does that work?
Yeah, it depends on the form. If it's been wired to an account, usually by the time we're involved, it's 2 accounts later. And so it can't be transferred, or I'm sorry, it can't be canceled. That really, basically we try to go to the financial institution, and all of the local institutions that we have here have been great trying to help us with that. The ones that we have been able to stop are, there was a combination one time of money that was wired, gift cards and a check. We were able to stop the check and the gift cards because they hadn't been sent yet. And there's been times where, a personal check was mailed and we were actually able to contact the financial institution. They were able to put a stop payment on it before it was actually cashed. So there are some times we're able to do that, but usually not.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
How often are those creating these scams actually caught?
Very, very rarely. I think that particularly the federal partners at that level, when they are able to get, the ring, let's say, of people who are overseas, they do a good job of publicizing that so that we know about it. That happens a couple of times every year. But normally what'll happen is they'll just move on, right? If a person, if they go at somebody and they don't give them that information right away, they'll just move on to the next person. And normally it's overseas. So there's really no way we at the local level have any way to do that. But if they're local, and it's a criminal case, the homeowner scams, for example, of people who are getting scammed out of decks or roofs, there's a couple of people we're prosecuting right now. So if we can not physically put our hands on the person, but you understand what I mean by the phrase of if they're here, we're able to do that very easily. It's just a matter of the people who, when it's international, there's very little hope for us to be able to do that.
Does Grand Traverse County participate in public service announcements to further warn the public about these scams?
Yes, we do. And you'll see that I think, and the news partners are very good about helping us with that, where a local police department will get a couple of calls and then they'll put out a statement, which is then sent out to folks.
Awesome. And I've got one more.
Sure.
So I don't know if you'll have this statistic or not. But would you say that Northern Michigan, like you guys see more of these cases in Northern Michigan as opposed to maybe the rest of the state, like the east side of the state or something, because of our retirement population?
That's a good question. I guess my answer I don't have the numbers on that. I would have to compare it with other prosecutors' offices. Certainly that would be a concern of mine, that we would be targeted. I guess I would phrase my answer as the scammers are going to target a particular area for who they think they can get, right? So if we have a higher elderly population and generally there's more money involved, right? I mean, just look at the home values of Leelanau County, Grand Traverse County, and some of the other areas around us. Yeah, they're going to pursue those elderly scams for targeting those folks. Whereas if it's an area where there's a younger population, I mean, if you're going to target, let's just say, if you're going to go to Michigan State University and try to target the college kids just to be able to give up their information or something, you're going to use a different kind of scam. You might use a different dating app or something like that to target those folks, but they still will. Unfortunately, it just, there's no discretion, and they'll go after everybody, unfortunately.
And someone is asking, how can you stop the Robo calls? They get 15 a day and they don't answer, but the people calling know it's a real number. Yeah,
I wish I had a magic answer for this, and unfortunately there is no way. Although I was giving this presentation on elder abuse actually, and a woman gave me the best answer that I can give you, and I just love it. She bought a whistle, and anytime they call, she would answer the phone and just blow into the whistle, and it apparently worked very well for her. So my apologies to those that you live with, for those listening, but if you want to try that, by all means.
All right, so there you go, get a whistle.
Yeah, get a whistle. Protect you in a lot of ways.
All right, well, that's all the questions I've got in the chat. Okay. So thank you again, Charlie, for coming and presenting on a very relevant topic, especially around tax season and getting these stimulus checks. You're getting a lot of applause. Sorry, everyone, for not unmuting you. So yeah, we appreciate it, Charlie. And thank you all for joining us. Have a good rest of your night.
And I think before people sneak off, a few people popped in at the end, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be the harp on it. If you want to put your name, your first and your last name in the chat box, and we can save it for attendance just for those who didn't get a chance to do that before. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
And I'm supposed to relay the message, FBI is #1.
Garrett.
You typed it in there a few
Well,
times.
it's a good,
Like,
it's a
okay.
good show on, it's a good show on television, and I usually figure it out before
It
the
is
30
great.
minute mark. So
All right. Thank you guys.
thanks, everybody.